Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
This week on To the Contrary, how the pandemic has reshaped the world of work and how changes have hit women harder than men. Then, how to reform juvenile justice systems. Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, women, work, and the post-pandemic work world. As back-to-work parents join back-to-school children, parents are facing a whole new work world, markedly jumbled and dissimilar from the one they knew pre-pandemic. This fall, some major firms are requiring workers to return full-time to the office. Others offer hybrid work, a combination of office and at-home work. Pandemic-era parents who became very used to working from home are resisting a return to daily commutes, fighting rush hour jams, and seeing a lot less of their kids. According to the National Women's Law Center, quote, among full-time year-round workers in 2020, mothers were typically paid 74 cents for every dollar paid to fathers. This means that during the pandemic, the pay gap cost mothers $17,000 per year. Then there's the torturous experience of many mothers who lost jobs due to the pandemic or went part-time as schools went remote and childcare dried up. Mothers who worked full-time in 2020 typically made just 58 cents for each dollar earned by fathers. The pandemic forced 500,000 more working women out of the labor force than men. Women are still down a net 98,000 jobs since before the pandemic, even as men have recovered all their losses and then some. The Washington Post reports Americans want more fulfilling lives and no longer assume a career in a traditional job gets them there. White-collar workers have started a viral online discussion of so-called quiet quitting. That's when they don't quit, but they do scale back from 60 to 40-hour weeks. Meanwhile, Forbes reports working from home has some serious downsides for women who receive less exposure and are excluded from important interactions, even in hybrid working environments. Those factors hold women back. Perhaps all these changes help explain a resurgence in union organizing. Since 2020, 4,000 people, or 90% of those who work in Google's cafeterias, have joined unions. The website payscale.com reports 96% of cafeteria workers are women. Joining me today are D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, Republican political strategist Rina Shah, co-founder of Repro Action Erin Matson, and Republican consultant Ann Stone. So starting with you, Rina Shah, is it too late to push workers full-time back to the office? Has that gone forever, do you think?
I certainly don't think it's too late for people to get a push from their bosses to be back in the office. There are some good benefits to being in a workplace, surrounded by others after we've had so much time of isolation, but it also very much depends on the industry you're in. So I think that I'm encouraged to see these calls to have people return to some degree of normalcy, but I want people to understand that there should be caution. If you're at the top of a food chain, there are employees that need their needs met as well.
Of course, we're not talking about low-income women here. We will get to that because most office workers are going to be higher paid. They're working online, etc. Seeing this rush in organization of cafeteria workers who on average nationwide, that's 96% of them are women. Is that due to seeing them more transparency Erin, seeing them, they see what other workers at Google are getting and they want the same benefits?
Google, cafeteria workers, Starbucks, Amazon. I mean, we're seeing record interest in unions right now. And it's really exciting to see this surge of workers rising together and demanding better protections. I think it's a great thing. Bonnie, the nature of work has shifted since the pandemic, and it is incumbent on leaders of organizations to figure it out, or they are going to lose their talent.
You know, I listen to people who say that, and to media reports that talk about, never going back. But what about the next recession? I mean, the job market is strong right now. There aren't enough employees. What about when the Fed cranks up interest rates so high that even that goes into recession? Are people still going to turn down good jobs that require full-time in-office appearances?
No, we have good times now, so there's every reason for workers to use their leverage. You get into a recession, you're in a whole different ball game. Then the ball is in the hands of the employer. We're in good times now, and workers are taking advantage of it.
Well, high income, high wage earners like Goldman Sachs, whose workers are being required to return to the office full time, will they be able to find other work that pays them that much?
They may not be able to, but you know what? If somebody is a competent business owner, they understand their number one asset are their workers. And even the lower income workers, it doesn't matter. Once you get them trained, you've invested that money. To drive them out by being unreasonable is insane. It's business insanity.
Rina, as an anti-Trump Republican, the Obama administration started the law to require employers who fill out how many people of each gender or non-binary and of each race work for them and in what capacities, to add salaries to that. And the Trump administration threw that part of the rule out. The National Women's Law Center took the Trump administration to court and just recently got that rule reinstated. So in a couple of years, I don't know how many, but we will be getting that information. Once women know what their bosses, what their male office compatriots are making and finding out that for the same job, they're being paid less. Women of color, even more so. What's that going to do?
Well, I welcome any amount of transparency we can get from any degree of government. When we push for that, we encourage society to be more open and accepting and in the end inclusive. And that's the name of the game for so many people who are, at the federal level serving now. But it seems that there is one political party that wants inclusivity in a certain way versus another. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I think it's about how we spend our dollars on obtaining certain type of data. Of course, any job that is funded by any amount of taxpayer dollars, I think we definitely need that sunlight on those figures. But in the private sector, it's encouraging and helpful. And I think corporations will be more willing to submit that data and push it out into the public sphere too, because it definitely helps make society work better.
Do you really believe, for example, that finding out what a CEO earns, who earns something like 50 times what the average employee in the company that sometimes she runs, is that going to make things better?
I really appreciate transparency. And, Bonnie, in publicly traded companies, that information about what the CEOs are being paid is available publicly. And so that is something, executive pay has ballooned. It has not caught up for workers. And I think it's incumbent in this economy, in this moment where work is being redefined, for leaders to listen to people at all levels in their organization, raise salary bands, have transparency just at hiring in terms of what salary ranges are for a given position, and really institute those flexible schedules that people are demanding. So I think that's one piece of a broader puzzle. But yes, information is power.
Transparency ultimately is good. And I know that a lot of people fear it that are in executive positions because they know they probably are making more than they should for what they're contributing. I don't think lower level employees think they should be making what the chief executive is. But I think it puts pressure, as well as if it's publicly traded, having shareholder spotlight on it as well, to try to make sure those CEO, compensation is in line with what they're actually contributing.
All right, that's it for this discussion. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnier Bay. Behind the headlines: juvenile justice, poverty, lack of opportunities, and youth incarceration is a problem facing many American cities. In the state known as the world's incarceration capital, residents work toward sustainable solutions.
I was supposed to go to the Gators to play football and ended up in prison.
In 1994, a young man from New Orleans, Keana Callaway, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, feticide, and home robbery. He was convicted and sentenced to life.
At 17 years old, my life was deliberated and deadlocked, all for a crime that I did not commit.
His first appeal ended in a mistrial. In a third trial, Callaway was convicted of a lesser charge, second-degree manslaughter. His sentence, 34 years, 17 in prison and 17 on parole.
My first day home, I vowed that as long as I'm alive, I'll do everything in my power to make sure that another Keana has to endure the pain and the hardships and the trauma that was forced upon my life.
With 6 more years on parole, Callaway continues to fight for exoneration, all while keeping his word to give back. He founded Project Detour, a mentoring program, and as executive director of Roots and Renewal, Callaway helps formerly incarcerated men re-enter society. Roots of Renewal teaches life strategies and construction skills with on-the-job training.
The program is actually my life work. After Katrina, there's over tens of thousands of blighted houses in our city, in our communities. Has just been sitting there for the past 16, 17 years. So what we've done is we have a relative partnership that actually go out and identify these properties that we can actually revamp, rehabilitate, revitalize, and actually put back on the market for little to low-income families.
Callaway also connects police and lawmakers with young people to promote understanding and better relationships. It's a big job, but the people of New Orleans, working for a better tomorrow, say they learned an important lesson in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina.
We can never do this work alone. We have to do it collectively. And we, by being in a coalition, like working with the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, we are all of a part of a coalition.
The Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, or LCCR, plays a big role in that coalition.
We've never seen a year where the population of arrested children was less than 95% Black children. We've gone 2 years with only locking up Black children in our jail here in New Orleans.
LCCR serves as public attorney for 90% of juveniles arrested. Executive Director Aaron Clark-Rizzio says this work is not only crucial to the individuals they represent, but also to the community.
We use what we learn through this representation to guide our policy advocacy work, where we are largely trying to shrink the harmful systems right now in the juvenile justice system and the criminal legal system.
I advocate to change the laws that affect our clients and the work that we do in the courtroom.
Rachel Gassert, a policy director for LCCR, works with like-minded organizations.
We all come together every week to have a strategy call. We're up there in committee hearings together and just commiserating on text threads, but we try to, support each other's legislative priorities.
One legislative victory was the passage of the Raise the Age law. 17-year-olds in Louisiana are no longer automatically charged as adults, although judges still have discretion in violent crimes. Limiting solitary confinement is also an objective.
When a problem is so acute, like the current use of solitary confinement in our prisons here in Louisiana with children, we are compelled to act. We need to stop that sort of state violence as quickly as we can. But overall, we use it to call attention to why locking up children is ineffective and that youth prisons are ineffective.
And they focus on solutions.
Increasingly, we're also trying to propose alternatives to the system, such as the use of restorative justice, and also just investing in the health and wellness of communities as a true, crime fighting strategy.
Their holistic approach includes youth advocates and social workers.
As a social worker, help guide the family and the children throughout the stages of the court proceedings.
They also assess young people's needs in education, housing, jobs, and family reunification. They listen carefully and respectfully to community concerns.
It's important for the community members to come together, for those who are partnering to make sure that that child is connected to what they need. And the reason being is that when we have more support, the better outcome the child will have.
General pushback is that juvenile justice reform doesn't work. There's absolutely no evidence for that. We have plethora of evidence that putting kids in youth prisons and detention centers, and certainly adult prisons, only increases their likelihood that they're going to reoffend.
Another partner in the Juvenile Justice Mission is Covenant House.
They're the only youth shelter in the city. For years, we had a drop-in legal clinic there. We often, are serving the same young people.
And we recently just had a meeting specifically to talk about a couple clients that we serve, that we both serve, and just working through some challenges, trying to identify the best way that we collectively can support those individuals.
Renisha Robertson is executive director of Covenant House, providing housing for the homeless aged 16 to 22.
Most of our kids have had some encounter with the juvenile justice systems. We have had conversations with some of our juvenile judges. It is important that we build relationships, that they are aware of the services that are available.
Robertson also looks back to the lessons of Katrina.
My first experience was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, working together, leveraging our individual resources, our individual networks, funding. We had to work together. It was our lifeline. We had to rebuild a community, rebuild systems. You couldn't do it without the support of, your community, other community partners. So I think that carried over. That's truly has been a model, I think, in the New Orleans landscape.
Eleanor, how important is juvenile justice reform?
Well, this is certainly the time to do it. And so you have the country looking at how we treat juveniles and making reforms for the first time in many years. This may have been brought on by COVID, making people look at reforms in many areas, but we have not made reforms in juvenile justice for as long as I can remember. So this is a very important moment for juvenile justice.
Well, but we have made reforms years ago, reforms in the sense that we're trying to give people who are incarcerated some education so they get out with something behind having spent 20 years being locked up and not gaining any skills. What do you think, Erin, are the best ways to help young people, and particularly young people of color, gain reading skills, writing skills, marketable skills, so when they get out, they don't have to return to crime to earn a living?
In particular, we need to look at this systemically, and it is young people of color are over-targeted by police, over-incarcerated compared to their white peers. And so that's part of the system as well. And then, of course, underinvestment in education and resources. And we see even the struggle for clean drinking water. I mean, imagine what is happening right now in Jackson, Mississippi. When we talk about young people who are currently in the system, one, I would strongly advocate looking at people who are currently in the system and seeing who can be let go immediately. There are a number of young people who are serving time for nonviolent offenses where there must be some better way to go about this. Two, providing education inside and providing opportunities and ways to get out. Three, going back and looking at folks who've been charged as adults. No one should be thrown away for the rest of their life when they are a young person. Bonnie, a lot of this has to do with racism.
I've known of people who were incarcerated and learned how to read the law and started working with their lawyers on their own defenses to try to get out of prison sooner. Is it possible to do that with kids?
Well, let me tell you, I'm so passionate about this. I actually did independent study on juvenile justice back when I was in high school. Took off an entire year of high school to do it. And sadly, a lot of the things that I observed back then, we're talking decades ago, still exist in the system. It's still a problem. But three of you have touched on exactly one of the keys, and that's education. A lot of these kids that end up in there, it's because they can't read and write, don't feel that they can get ahead. So giving them some hope is important. But I also will tell you, my family, a lot of law enforcement. My brother, my late brother, was a chief of police for 30 years. And one of the things he was known for was letting kids off on their first offense. And he would say to them, I'm going to give you a chance. I see you back here, and you're going to get more than the book thrown at you. Some of the kids that he let off, I would have an occasion to meet when I was visiting in his hometown, and they would tell me the difference it made in their lives. And almost to a person, it turned their lives around. So I think more and more we have to do more to keep them out of the system, give them that second chance.
But nowadays, there's so many children coming from, single parent homes, no other parent involved, many children in the family, right. 6, 7 kids in the family, no money, just from a cop telling them, you better do better. Is that really enough? They need resources.
Not a better do better, but I'm going to give you another chance. And I'll tell you, one of the guys I can remember came from one of those situations, single mother, a lot of siblings, really distressed situation, but he did turn his life around because he saw somebody gave him a chance. And also putting them in contact with better role models, especially male role models for the male juvenile delinquents, is a really important thing. But education is central to all of it.
Rina, do you think those kids are open to change? If you get into prison when you're 15 and you come in with a first grade reading level, can you change?
Well, I mean, kids are kids at the end of the day. And when you see these juvenile populations, and I've had intimate experience with this because in 2007, I was at Georgetown University Law Center, and I was through their criminal justice clinic. I was doing an investigative internship, and I got to know so many young people who were unfortunately locked up in DC prison. And I visited with them, and they were so hungry and starved for attention, for relationship, for some kind of bond. I kept in touch as a pen pal, a writing pen pal for years with a couple of them. And it was such a pleasure to get their letters. But at the same time, I was so saddened because so much of their life hadn't changed. And it felt like the world was moving on without them. And some would get locked up again. And it feels like nothing has changed. There are these schools that are out there that are starved for any type of resource so that their people and their students can do better in general and send out better students into the community. There are 2 systems of justice for people of color in this country. There are these youths who are committing smaller offenses, and yet they're seeing people with connections with money get off for doing far worse. So what are we doing here? I think we need real reform from the state level, but it can happen at the county level too. It has to be an all of the above approach.
Does it require federal resources? Do localities have enough money to give these kids the opportunities, the help, the support, the relationships that Rina was talking about that they crave, the attention, etc.? I mean, you hear about juvenile facilities, they're all understaffed.
Federal resources are absolutely essential. Juvenile justice is not where states are putting their money. In fact, prisons of any kind, and certainly not juvenile justice camps are not where the money is going. It's going to be up to Congress to program, that is to say, target money to these facilities if they want these juveniles to become working law-abiding adults.
You know, there's been this trend across the country in recent years, not just to privatize things like parking meters, but prisons. And essentially what these private companies do, some of them overseas companies, is they squeeze all of the profits out of the budget and leave the prisons with fewer resources.
But the last thing you want to do is to privatize these facilities. You're absolutely right. There's no incentive to put money into these facilities unless you are a local jurisdiction or a state. So privatizing would mean starving them. It's the last thing you want to do if you want to reform juvenile justice facilities.
All right. Thanks to you all. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.